Thanks, Wynne. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll have some fun here.
Thank you. Now it is my... Hello. There we are. Now it is my privilege to introduce the Premier. If you've been at this conference, you know the Premier. She has attended it every year since she became Premier, and before that in different cabinet positions since 2006. Change is a constant, and as municipal governments, we've seen our fair share of changes. We will see the 10-year upload agreement come to completion in the 2018 budget. Do you believe it? That big download in the 90s is about 20 years ago, all of which leads to the question, what's next? But rather than listen to me, let's get the Premier out here, and after her remarks, Richard Brennan will interview her. And I believe there will be a time, possibly, for a couple of short questions from the audience, short being the operative word. Please help me welcome, the Honourable Kathleen Wynne.
Wynne, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Premier, thank
How
you.
are you? Good to see you. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all here. Am I supposed to start, or are you going to start? I'm waiting. I'm actually waiting for Kathleen.
Oh, you'll get that.
So it is, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Lynn, wherever you've gone. There she is. Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for the introduction. But more than that, thank you for taking on this role. I know it is very time-consuming, and thank you to you and your family for being part of this. It's great to be back here again, folks. And I think we have a half an hour, and Lynn, you were saying maybe questions and answers, and I really want to get to that part. So I'm not going to talk for a long time. I just want to make a couple of remarks, and then Richard will yell at me, and then we will have a conversation. So let me just begin by saying that it is always important to me to have the opportunity to engage with municipal leaders. Those of you who have known me as a minister and as the Premier know that, that I want to have these conversations, and I know that you're having a really important discussion about globalization and Main Street and community at this meeting, and I think it's an extremely timely discussion to be having. I know, and you all know, you live in communities, you know how strong community is, you know how communities come together when there are issues. I was just in Eastern Ontario a few months ago, and Jim Watson and I see Mayor Watson in the front row, we toured some of the flood sites, and we know that communities came together around that and so many other issues in your communities. But we also know that globalization is one of the things that has created uncertainty in our communities and in our society. And so that's when governments, all orders of government, have to step in and play a role in making sure that we do everything we can to make life as certain as possible and to deal with the issues as they arise. And I think right now there's a heightened sense of uncertainty in the geopolitical realities that we're facing. But even here in Ontario, where we're doing very well, the economy is growing, we're outstripping national growth, we're outstripping the growth of G7 countries in the US, but even with all of that, there are groups of people, there are places that are not feeling the benefit of that growth. They're not feeling that they can be optimistic about the future. They're wondering about what's going to happen with their kids, with their grandkids, what's going to happen with their own future. So that's why at this particular moment we are working very hard to try to support people, to try to make sure that that people have the resources that they need. So whether that's lowering their electricity bills, which my colleagues and I heard a lot about here last year, or whether it's helping people with their medication, helping them pay for medication for their kids from 0 to 25, or whether it is free tuition for young people starting this September who otherwise may not go to college or university. All of those things are things that we are doing to try to confront some of the challenges that people face. And into that category falls increasing the minimum wage and making sure that the labor laws that we have in this province are updated to the realities of the workplace, because there's nowhere that we see the uncertainty more clearly than in the nature of work. More part-time work, less certain hours, people changing careers many times, changing jobs many times over their career. Having a minimum wage that is a living wage is part of introducing some certainty into to people's work lives. So that is the work that we are trying to do as a provincial government. And always at the core of that is our relationship with the other orders of government. And so our work with municipalities is critical. When I talk about the infrastructure investments that we're making across this province, and I talk about the big number, the $190 billion over 13 years, that is a very large number, and it's spread across all of the municipalities, all of the regions of the province. And we're making those investments, and they're made in different regions on different projects, but we're making those investments because we know that in order for people to be able to do well in their communities, and in order for municipalities to be able to thrive, we need to partner with them and work with them. I know one of the things that Richard is going to ask me about, because it's top of mind for you folks, is about long-term sustainability and the proposal that has come forward around an increase to the HST. We're not going to do that. We are going to continue to have a discussion with you, as we began last year, about what is next. What are the things that we need to be tackling next? But right now, when we're trying to take costs off people's monthly bills, while we're trying to support people to make ends meet, raising the provincial portion of the HST would actually fly in the face of that. So let's talk about what that means, and as I say, I know Richard's going to ask me about that. But I don't want anyone to think that, that we are in any way going to ever step back from the importance of this relationship. I got into provincial politics for a number of reasons. One of them was to fight for publicly funded education, but another one was to fight for a decent, respectful, and honest relationship with municipalities, which had not been in place previously. So that is something that I see as a fundamental of my political life and my political philosophy. And so I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to the conversation with Richard. So thank you very much. Merci.
Now, this usually starts out with me yelling, Kathleen, what are you trying to hide?
Yeah.
But we'll try and dispense with that today.
You said that very calmly.
Well, I am retired, so. I do want to say one thing before we begin the questions, and that is, a lot of the folks here, 1,200 people, have come a long way and are looking for answers from you, and trying to find out, what your approach is in the coming years and decades, I guess, to, for municipalities. So if we can keep our answers short.
I keep my answers short.
Anyway, well, yeah, you're reading my notes upside down again. As you know, yesterday AMO called for a 1 percentage point hike, and you've dismissed it out of hand. Well,
But let you finish, right?
well, you've dismissed it. Let's put it that way. At this point in time, why?
So I just had the opportunity to meet with your president, with Lynn, and we had a brief conversation about this. But let me just let me just lay out where we are on this. I said that what we're trying to do is help people make ends meet in an uncertain time and to take costs off their monthly bills. So last year when I was here, we were talking about revenue tools in a sort of broad way. And we talked about some of the revenue tools that are enshrined, for example, in legislation around the City of Toronto Act. And, you know, could AMO work with communities to look at some of those revenue tools? And whether it's those revenue tools or others, what I said at the time was that I think that there needs to be a very complete conversation in communities about what constituents are open to seeing, what they see as the viable options around revenue tools. And that if we had that discussion, if we had that conversation, sort of community by community, and then we could talk about the menu of things that might be reasonable. I haven't heard that conversation around certainly around the HST, or quite frankly around the other revenue tools either. And I think it's necessary that we have that discussion, Richard. And that's what I said. That's what I said last year, and I think that is still what needs to happen. But the second piece of this, and then I will stop, is that we did have a big conversation, and Lynn actually referenced when we first came into office under the previous premier, we had a big conversation together about what would need to happen in order to adjust and correct the relationship between, the fiscal relationship between the province and municipalities. And Bill Morrow, Minister Morrow, went over the list of things that were on the request list from municipalities, and we've acknowledged and dealt with and responded to almost all of those. I think it's 10 out of the 12. And so now we need to have the next discussion about what are the gaps, what are the actual needs, because we've put billions of dollars into infrastructure funding. What's actually missing from that long-term fiscal sustainability?
Well, I think the folks here have had that conversation.
Well,
And they've agreed
well,
that this is a money that they need to make ends meet.
well.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
For many years, every time I wrote about municipalities, I'd say cash-strapped municipalities. Practically every story I ever wrote, that was attached to it. Nobody ever disagreed with me, because they are. What you're saying is, you know, we want to talk about this sometime later down the road, have a conversation. I've heard that many times from you, have a conversation. But the point is, what's the alternative?
Well,
the alternative is to raise taxes.
No, but Richard, here.
Well, the
look,
property taxes, that's the only way they're going to make up the money.
Okay, but let me just go back to what I said about what the gaps are. I mean, we have put in place the Community Infrastructure Fund that will be $300 million a year, permanent funding for municipalities in direct response to what rural and northern municipalities said to us. We've put back Connecting Links funding, $190 billion. 190, and it, you know, it's going to 30 million. I know there are communities that haven't seen the benefit of that, but it is cumulative, and we will be dealing with those Connecting Links issues. But I think that we need to be honest about what the real gaps are. Is it roads? Is it bridges? We're building schools and hospitals. We had a conversation last year about closing schools. We're putting money into building community hubs and put a moratorium, put a pause on those changes around school closures while we find ways to have school boards work together and municipalities work with school boards. So I want to know, like, what are the real issues? Is it the roads that were downloaded by a previous government? Is that what we need to talk about? Is it recreational infrastructure that we need to talk about? What is it on those asset management lists? What is it, community by community, that is actually the gap? Let's have that discussion. And in having that discussion, let's talk about what those revenue tools are. As I said, I have not heard, and I've been in dozens of communities over the last year, I have not heard that discussion from mayors. I haven't had mayors coming up to me saying, you know what, these are the tools we'd like to have. This is the resolution our council has passed. These are the town halls meetings we've had with our community. I hadn't heard about the HST until a couple of days ago. So I don't think we've had a provincial discussion about whether that's actually what people can afford.
It may not have filtered up to you, but I can't believe no one in your caucus had ever heard about that before. The 1%.
Possibly. That's possible.
I'm sorry, I just...
Yeah, fair enough. But as a provincial discussion, Richard, that's a different thing, right?
And you listed all the concerns, schools, roads and that. Well, I think you can tick off all those boxes if you want to.
But I was listing those as things that we are dealing with.
And
right?
a crusty old city editor once told me, he said, "I don't care what you did for me yesterday. I know." He said, "I want to know what you're going to do for me today and tomorrow."
Yep, fair enough.
And that's what people want to know. And so that brings me to the question, do you think grants and transfers can make all 444 municipalities sustainable?
Well, I don't think that grants and transfers are all that municipalities exist on. I mean, that's not the reality. It's a combination of revenue that is generated at the local level. And, we're making adjustments, for example, around the way municipalities can make investments. And as we flow grants and monies to municipalities, we're changing the way they can put those into reserves, the way they can accumulate those dollars. So we are responding to the challenges that municipalities have put before us, and we're increasing funding at the same time. And we have to have the next conversation. I'm not suggesting that all the answers are on the table, but I am saying that there are billions of dollars that are flowing into municipalities right now, and let's figure out what the actual gaps are.
Does the fact there's an election next June have a lot to do with your decision?
Well, I think a cynical person could say, well, you've got an election.
You're looking at them.
I know. So you could say, Kathleen, you've got an election next June. Why don't you just say yes to what the municipalities are asking and do what they ask? And my response is, because we've had an honest and an open relationship, and I am really proud of the way that we've worked with municipalities and the responses that we've made, and I want that to continue.
Speaking of election, next June.
Yes.
You're running again.
I am.
Yes. And what is your party's policy with respect to municipal governments? Like, what is it you're prepared to do for these folks?
Well, I think that.
I'm talking about new endeavors.
I understand.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at our record, you'll be able to see our future policy, which is we are going to continue to work with municipalities. We are investing heavily in whether it's transit, whether it's roads, whether it's bridges, whether it is water and wastewater. We've now got a federal government that is working with us. So we've actually got 3 levels of government, 3 orders of government that are working together. And we will continue on that path. I think that there is the next phase of the, how do we have the fiscal, how do we make sure the fiscal relationship is solid? We took a long time to sort out the downloading, uploading equation when we set that up.
It was a real long time, yeah.
Beg your pardon?
It was a real long time that it took.
But we've been making those changes, and so there's $4 billion worth of room that wasn't there before we had those discussions. So it was a very productive conversation that led to action that has undone much of the damage that was done. That doesn't mean it's all over. It doesn't mean that we're done.
Would you consider uploading roads again?
So I think there are a couple of areas that we have to look at. I think the uploading of roads, when I was Minister of Transportation, this was one of the things that was raised with me. I think we do have to look at what are the roads that were downloaded that shouldn't have been. What are the ones that actually it makes sense to have been downloaded? So I think that is one of the areas. Another area that I'm very worried about, and we haven't had a discussion about with this group, or quite frankly, with all 3 levels of government, and that is recreational infrastructure. One of the things I hear in communities, one of the things that I have heard repeatedly in communities is we've got an arena or we've got a rec center that needs to be rebuilt. We don't have, there's no pot of money. And you know, I know there's social infrastructure money coming from the federal government, but it's a small number across the whole province, across the whole country. And so I think we need to talk about how are we actually going to deal with recreational infrastructure. I believe that, I believe that sports infrastructure is critical, and in small municipalities particularly, it's very, very difficult to raise those funds. So those are two areas that if we had a big conversation about what the gaps actually are, if it was the next phase of that fiscal relationship discussion, I think both those things would be on the table.
Maybe we'll have to bring back L'Ontario. Just talking to the folks, you know, during the past couple of days I've been here, something that kind of, I know that they're very concerned about is that the province hands down, brings in new regulations or passes new legislation, you know, be it public health, environment, you name it, regs, usually. And that puts additional financial burden on there. And they really have no say in it.
Well, I mean, that's what the AMO MOU table was set up to do, Richard. I mean, it was set up to allow the leadership of AMO to actually see what was coming down the legislative pipe at them. And so those meetings happen every 6 weeks or so.
But do they have a say in it?
Well, yeah. I mean, the ministers come with their proposals. Now, sometimes there's more time in the lead up than others, but that's what the AMO MOU table was set up to do, was to allow for that input before the legislation was finalized.
And I know this is a real burr under their saddle. It's police costs. You're reviewing the Police Services Act, correct?
We are, yeah.
But are you looking for ways to curb the continuing increase in policing costs?
Well, as Lynn Dolan raised with us, there's concern about us hearing the recommendations that they have made. I'm very convinced that we need to work hand in hand with the municipalities, because the recommendations that they've brought forward are designed to do that, designed to curb costs. I think we need to make sure that we pay close attention to that and that we follow their lead in that area. So we'll work closely with them. And yeah, I think that we need to recognize that municipal leadership is on the front line of understanding community safety in their own communities.
And for total clarity, I'm also an OPP auxiliary officer, and I get $300 a year. So there.
Full disclosure.
But I still can't get my head around the fact that I don't see any resolve here by the government to actually tackle the problem in terms of, we're looking, you know, if you believe that, and I certainly puts a lot of strength in it, you know, the poll that was done for AMO and the information that's been collected is that they can't continue to do what they're doing with the money they have coming in. It's just that simple.
So I am very sympathetic to the importance of municipal governments, communities being able to meet the needs of their people. I mean, I was just on the Rainy River with a group of Métis Nation youth, and we actually stayed in Fort Frances and Emo and Rainy River. And when we were in when we were in Rainy River, one of the counselors came down to the park where we were camping and talked about, as people come off the bridge into Rainy River, there's a need for some infrastructure that would actually greet them, that would announce that they're in Canada, would announce that they're in Ontario. And I was reminded of a meeting I had when I was Minister of Transportation with folks from Terrace Bay, and at that point they were looking for support for their sort of Main Street infrastructure. So, you know, I really do understand, and I'm very sympathetic to municipalities having those resources, which is exactly why we're continuing to try to find ways to put money in place, Richard. And I'm not sure where you're going with our grants good enough. I mean, there's money that goes out by formula, whether it's the OMPF funding or whether it's most of the 2/3 of the community infrastructure funding. So the OMPF funding is around $500 million. The community infrastructure will be $300 million in 2019, or whether it's the doubling of the gas tax, which I know only addresses needs in around 100 of the communities in the province. But each one of those communities has particular needs, and so the funds that we're putting in place are designed to deal with the issues that have been raised with us by people in this room.
But when you boil down everything you're saying, is you're leaving municipalities to raise taxes. I mean, I don't know how else they're going to do it. I mean, it's just that plain.
But here's the thing. The proposal that came forward around the HST, that's about constituents paying more taxes. Every person in every municipality in this province would be paying more taxes. And what I'm saying right now is...
But paying taxes for, consumer taxes and paying taxes on your home are entirely different.
They're different things. I get that. I understand that. But I do believe that we need to have a better understanding, and there needs to be a better understanding among people about the money that's already flowing into the community and what the real gaps are, what it is that we're talking about. Are we talking about community centers? Are we talking about roads? What are we talking about?
But all of those things.
Well, not in every community.
Well,
not in every community.
there's very
Richard.
few
They're
communities
different. It
don't have
depends where
most
you
of
are.
these things you're talking about.
Well, I guess I would say that in the dozens of communities that I go into, it's not always the same issue. There are different issues that are raised depending on the geography, depending on the economy of the community, and so that's why we need to have that conversation.
I'm not sure at this point whether we have
Go to
another
questions?
5 minutes after this, or do we know? Anyone? As it's count
we
down,
go to questions?
we have less than a minute and a half left, and I'm not sure if that's part of your 5 minutes or not.
I'm in your hands here, so.
Oh boy.
Why don't we go to questions in case we're?
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? We got mics, or we just got hands?
If
Okay.
you can go to the mic, that'd be terrific. Folks are holding up the cards that have mics.
No, they're the mics. Okay.
Premier Wynne, James the Duke from Bradford, West Gwillimbury.
Hi, James.
Thank you for talking to us today.
Pleasure.
I think your stance on the 1%, I don't support that either. I think there's better ways to deal with the uploading of some of our costs. You touched on a little bit with the police services. I was hoping, Premier Wynne, that you would look at the emergency services, fire and police. I wonder if that would be something you'd look at for helping us out community-wise.
So I think, I think that has to be part of the next conversation for sure. So the short answer is yes.
Number 2.
Is it on? I can stand. Premier Wynne, Dave Canfield, Mayor of Kenora, and I'm losing my voice. That's probably a pleasure for some people in the room.
Hi, Dave.
One of the things that we have grave concern over is Bill 148. And in its present form, actually the best form would be to throw it in the garbage. But in its present form, the impacts on composite fire departments and part-time staff, which are pretty normal in places, would absolutely, we have the highest municipal property taxes in Canada, we know that, would absolutely bankrupt a lot of our communities, especially composite fire departments and places have a couple of hundred volunteer fire departments. Would you please commit to either completely trashing Bill 148 altogether, or at least sit down and come with something reasonable that's not going to bankrupt us?
Yeah. Well, we're not going to trash Bill 148 because there are a lot of people in this province who are struggling to put together a job, who are struggling to look after their families, who are working full-time and going to the food bank. So no, we're not going to scrap Bill 148, but Bill 148 was never intended to punish municipalities. That was not the intention. And your president has already had a conversation with Minister Flynn, and we understand that there are unintended consequences, Dave, and so we will be absolutely looking at how we can deal with those. You know, the reason that we put Bill 148 out after first reading was so that we could go through one round of amendments and make sure that we got it closer to right, and then there would be another opportunity for a full consultation. So we will absolutely sit down with AMO and make sure that we don't unintentionally do something that would harm municipalities.
Number 3.
Hello, Premier Wynne, Mayor Steve Black, City of Timmins.
Hi, Steve.
I agree with you on your HST that it's a perception of taxes and it's still taxes. It comes from consumer or household. There's 3 taxes that are taxed at the municipal level that I feel are should be at a provincial level and could be uploaded. One is just it's a symbolic on our municipal tax bill, but provincially taxed and provincially managed is the education tax, which would free up 20% of our municipal tax bills. And the other is we're the only province in Canada that across our entire province downloads social housing and EMS to the municipal level. And wouldn't it be best just to upload those?
So let me just answer to both of those. So on education, there's still in the order of $5 billion that comes from municipalities to support the publicly funded education that educates all of our children. So you know, the reality is that the proportion of the education expenditure has gone down every single year relative to the total expenditure. So that's, you know, that's just a reality that we're dealing with. On housing, I just want to say that I am absolutely sure that we have not, as a country, I would suggest, got it right on housing. I mean, I am very interested in what the national housing strategy is going to look like and exactly how provinces and municipalities will work within that framework. We are, as you know, we've made changes in terms of the way funding flows to municipalities and allows the municipalities to have flexibility in funding for homelessness programs and so on. But we do not have it right yet on housing, and that's something that there's much more work to be done on. And so I certainly, on your second point, yes, we need to talk about what's next with housing, and on EMS. I think that's a conversation I'm not going to weigh into right now. I'd need to have more of a discussion with my colleagues and with all of you about exactly what that would mean.
Sorry, folks, that's it. We're trying to keep on schedule, and that's all the time we have, Premier.
Okay. Although, just hold on. There are 2 people. There were 2 people. Can I just take these last 2 quickly? Because I think we cut them short a bit, Richard. Sorry. I'm just going to
If you can answer quickly, yeah.
I can answer
okay,
quickly.
All right.
Okay. We'll go over here and then here to the 2 people who are standing. Yeah.
Okay. Over here. And
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Premier. Thank you for meeting with us today. Terry Flynn, Town of Niagara Lake Councillor. Along that emergency services, the concerns within the municipalities, you did just mention about the EMS and paramedics. And as you know, I did ask a question yesterday of the health minister with regards to the fire medic program, yes. And a lot of municipalities are concerned again about the cost, and we just heard about the cost of fire services, not just police services. And if this is a service that's added to the fire department, we as municipalities wouldn't be able to support all those fire departments having to become full-time. So my question to you, Premier, is where do you see this going? It was mentioned yesterday that there are 2 municipalities that are willing to do the pilot. We didn't find out who they were. I've heard, but I don't know if anybody here in the room knows for sure. But which 2 municipalities are doing the pilot, and where do you see this going? And if all the municipalities or majority are saying no to this, can we just squash it now?
So my understanding of the concern is that this would become part of an arbitration process across the province. And so the advice that I've gotten from your leadership is that we need to work with you to make sure that the protection in the legislation is strong enough that it doesn't become part of an arbitration process. And that's the commitment that we've made, that we will have that discussion, that we'll make sure that we build that in so that you're not affected inadvertently. Okay?
Sir?
And last one here.
Yes, Matt Mitro. I'm a first-term councillor from Sarnia, Ontario. Population 70,000. Asset management is a thing, so we've done our first section of it. And our linear assets, so not our parks and our buildings and such, but all streets, roads, that kind of thing. We have in active failure in Sarnia, Ontario, 270 million right now. So when you start talking millions that you're putting into programs, if we wanted to actually get caught up, we need 500 million in Sarnia alone. So I don't get where the millions should be billions.
Well, it is billions.
We're collecting 9% of the taxes at the municipal level. That struck me yesterday immediately. The upper two tiers have to feed the money down. Does it have to be 1% on the HST? I don't think so. I just think both levels of upper government need to be feeding money down to us.
And it is billions we're talking about. When we put our annual road programs in place, when we talk about all of the funds together, we are talking billions. And I think, Councillor, what you have raised is, again, back to that initial discussion of what is the sustainability mechanism? How do we take this relationship to the next level? And I commit to you that, as we have done, we will continue to respond to the concerns of municipalities.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thank you very much. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage AMO Executive Member, Chair of Durham Region, Roger Anderson.